where fill levels were still a little inconsistent, but better. And we had less oxygen going on. So as far as, being able to store a bottle for a longer term, that was great. And we would have just closed the flip top, wipe off the bottle, and, then someone would have to put a label on it. Now we have a $170,000 bottling line from Italy, and it can fill 500 milliliter bottles that we use, 375s, two types of 750s, and really any other bottle we want. For a couple of grand, we can get change parts and be running. And this machine, we load up the bottles by hand. They go down a conveyor. They get flipped, rinsed, gassed, filled, corked or crown capped, or bypass those closures where they come out. Then we manually apply a flip top, put it on the other conveyor belt of our flip top closing machine. And so before we got that machine and the flip top closer, 3 or 4 people working together would spend 3 or 4 days to, put 1,000 gallons of mead into about 5,000 bottles. We can do that in 6 hours now. So it's faster. It's more efficient. We're rinsing our bottles. We're gassing the bottles. We're closing them faster. And that's like an example of how you go from, doing really through gravity feeding all the way to something that's still very manual, labor intensive in a way. We're not pushing buttons from a computer and bottles of mead come out the other side yet. That's a fantasy down the road. But, that's one example of how we've gotten different equipment through, making loans and all that work. And then, other things. I would say one thing that if making mead, you're going to get into the commercial game and you're going to try and do something to stand out. Figure out some yeasts that you like to work with and figure out the nutrition regimen that those yeast need to be the happiest and healthiest in fermentation. And that just takes time, trial and error. Then you have to figure out the fermentation temperature in addition to that. And so for us, we went from being in a winery, we actually did barrel fermentation for the first year or so. And then when we got into our first expansion in downtown Prescott, we started using flex tanks, and we still did some barrel fermentation. And we were underground, and we had AC ducts, so that typically our fermentations were at the same temperature within a few degrees, but there was some fluctuation. And of course and we were trying to figure out what do our yeast need. And so in that process of I think required trial and error and not having strict temperature control, we had variations that were interesting, not necessarily bad, but definitely not as consistent as you would want for a commercial operation that's trying to grow and, distribution and whatnot. So as we were able to get to fermentation tanks that were glycol jacketed, it's a lot more like the set it and forget it, where, when the temperature gets above 68, 72, you've set it at, glycol starts circulating, and you're going to maintain very consistent temperatures. And that's one of the huge differences for us. And we have just figured out what those temperatures are to within a degree through trial and error to make our given products with our yeast and our ingredients work out the way we want them to taste. So I don't think there's a real easy way or a fast way to do that unless you're, just making batches every day and taking notes. But, over time, as you're trying new equipment and figuring things out, you start to get to that point. Filtration, same thing. Going from a plate and frame homebrew filter to a lenticular filter that takes 2 people to lift the bell off of, and probably we should use a forklift for it. You can get so much more in the way of positive results. So, as you grow your business and the revenue, which is just, money, allows you to have new resources or equipment, you get to figure out, all these options and what works for you. And that's also, I think, important if you're going to do the commercial thing, because you've got to really want to geek out on gear. And so if you like doing that, that'll be a plus for sure.
Mm-hmm. Did you have the most difficult time, like certainly when you're a home brewer and you might be making, 20 to 50 gallon batches at a time, and then you have to upscale to commercial level. And then of course, as you start to grow more and more, you're upscaling again to larger production runs. I've noticed some meaderies would make that step up to a bigger production facility, sometimes their quality seems to wane, maybe only temporarily, and sometimes questionable if it might be a permanent setback to some degree. I'm curious where you have run into your biggest challenges making a jump from one particular size to the next, or is it somewhat the same every time you move up to a bigger tanks and whatnot?
That's a really good question. I think we've been lucky, and I also think that we've learned so much as we've grown that we've been able to make some really fortunate, educated guesses, as we've made those decisions. So we haven't had too many setbacks. One thing we just had, we have a prickly pear mead that we like to make, and it had been a while, and we had never used our current filter, and it took too much of the flavor out to be the same product, right? And you can still taste,
right.
I think it's actually a better product than what we were going for in some ways, but to me it tastes much more like, say, a traditional mead with some tropical flavors that are really unique and some prickly pear. But, like when you're a home brewer, you worry about like, well, if I fine or filter, I'm going to strip out flavor. And generally we find that, filtering actually sort of, winemakers call it polishing, right? And so you can actually improve the flavor of things through filtering, and that's been our experience. But, in this case, we definitely lost some of that prickly pear character we were going for. And so, every once in a while you have a challenge like that. And then as a business, you have to think, okay, so this product is different than what we were going for. It's still great. It's actually better. So now we need to figure out, how do we brand this? And then you get into marketing, branding, and we need a new name. And how are we going to describe this? And, what are our tasting room folks going to say to let people know this is something that's really interesting? You should give it a shot. And what I find with, getting into the whole selling of mead, as soon as people try good mead, they like it, right? And I mean, I have this conversation with folks all the time, when we're getting into a new market, for example, and they're like, all right, so this is expensive. How do we get people to try it? And we go through all of the different points of why mead has it, why it costs more to make than, wine and beer. And I always say, as soon as people try it, they're going to dig it. They might not like every one, but if you give them a flight, and our best accounts, hands down, are the ones that offer our mead by the flight. Because for, a low price point commitment, a customer can go and just try 4 or 5 different things. They're going to like a couple of them. And then they're like, hey, cool, I tried something new. I get to bring a bottle home, share this experience. So I think that going back to production, when you have a challenge, as long as the product turns out good, which is, I guess, typically what happens with us when we have a mistake happen or something goes away we don't, want it to go. You have to think, all right, what can we do to either, rebrand this or come up with a new product name or blend it, So you have to use, I think, other skills. And I love cellaring and blending and using barrels and figuring out what can we do with these different products when you do have a challenge like that. Otherwise, I'm trying to think of, some things that have been challenging when it comes to production. Is there anything else you have, like a question on, or like an aspect of production maybe and you can trigger a story in my mind perhaps?
No, not necessarily about production. I know I was on your website earlier this evening, and I got to tell you, I was salivating over your page about your whole barrel issues the things you're doing with barrels. I'm thinking, oh my God, I wished I could get into that loop somehow. It seems for a home brewer, it's pretty hard to come across very many barrels at all. Most everybody has some kind of a reseller that might also be their initial wholesaler too, but it's pretty hard for us to get even just different types of bourbon barrels, let alone all the other barrels that you spoke of on your website. And I thought, well, that must be a perk that maybe you get when you're a big meat yourself.
Even when we started, like our first commercial batches were fermented in bourbon barrels, and so I always knew that using wood would be part of what we do at Superstition for me and cider. And as we grow, not everything is barrel aged, because you can't run a commercial business when the answer to when is it ready is it's ready when it's ready, right? You have to be able to
Right.
plan things a little bit. And even our
Sure.
staff to this day, like anyone that works in our tasting room that's a new hire, and they'll say, hey, when's that going to be ready? And we're like, it's ready when it's ready. And they think you're being a smartass. And you're like, no, really, we're going to go pour it in and do it. But yeah, when it comes to barrels, there's obviously an expense there that, when I was homebrewing, I never had a barrel, I have a friend that's a really handsome brewer here in Prescott, and he has, 2 barrels in his garage, and he does some Solera, Flanders red and brown owls going on that are just outstanding. But not many people really spring for that. But if you think about it, and I don't know, where do you live? What part of the country?
I'm in Denver.
So are you familiar with the Rocky Mountain Barrel Company?
I am, although I make my stuff in my house, and so I generally feel like I need to buy barrels. And my biggest barrel is probably like 32 gallons or so, and that's my biggest one. And then I've got some that are, maybe 25 to 30 gallons. And so most of Rocky Mountain's barrels are, 50, 55 gallons, and those are a little bit too big for my space allowance here at my house.
Well, I got you. Well, it sounds like you're doing some cool stuff. I would still encourage you to reach. Those guys have been great to us. And I would encourage you to reach out to them and say, hey, are you guys ever going to get some smaller barrels in? Because I know that they work with distilleries, and there are like commercial operations out there using smaller format barrels. Some of which you have. So yeah, I would reach out to those guys. And then the other thing, one thing we're about to start, I'm going to call it the Splinter Project. And so we're going to take local Arizona woods like juniper, mesquite that you wouldn't make a barrel from, and that and post them, and then throw it in our hop back and circulate mead through and see how that turns out.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. We've got another question from the chat. Gandalf is asking, and this is harking back to your equipment upgrades. Are the vendors as helpful as like IT vendors are? In IT, they sometimes help engineer your data centers. So did they help you sort of engineer your solutions in your bigger production facility?
Absolutely. When we bought our bottling line, that was the most expensive single thing I've ever purchased, besides, I guess, the building. But yeah, as far as equipment goes, that's the fanciest thing we have. And we, as part of our price, we flew out a trainer for a week to spend 5 days, 40 hours going through every aspect he could think of with all of our production staff. And there's a computer monitor that, it's a touchscreen and you're plugging things in to make it happen, make changes. And so, yeah, they were really helpful. And even when they set up our machine, they were having to ask questions to Italy where it was made. So yeah, it's amazing how technology comes into play even in like, bottling mead and pressure. So yeah, I would say that, any good equipment vendor is going to have some support there. So you don't have to worry about it so much when you're buying new equipment, because they're going to be able to back that up. So, and that's another reason where, if you're thinking about buying, say, an older bottling line, that there may not be a warranty, there may not be, any support there. However, there's still going to be other folks in the industry that have equipment that is of that age, that have troubleshot it and can give you advice. So before we decided on a bottling line, we, contacted at least 3 different references of breweries, as it were, that were using that same machine, and asked them for, for advice and to tell us about their experience. So I'd say whenever you're scaling up, doing research and getting references is really important. It's also important when picking a distributor. You definitely want to talk to some people that have worked with that company and see what their experience is. I think it would be sort of jumping in blind or bit irresponsible not to do that. So we always do reference checks on gear, on distributors, and then of course, people that you're hiring, if they're, coming recommended from someone, it's really good to have conversations about, how things went. So I think that would be a way to go there.
So I have another question, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah.
So I noticed I was looking at your product line and your price, and I will be one of the companies that's not afraid to offer some bottles at a bit higher price point. And I imagine that probably part of what we see reflective there is the I guess the real estate time, the floor time that those things take to mature in a bottle, or I mean, in your keg program, your keg, your